Hello everyone, this is Mona. We're going to go ahead and get started today. Today we're doing the Global Compliance webinar with Vendor University. We are recording today's webinar for your convenience. We can send out the video link and PowerPoint later today for those who are attending. Just some webinar etiquette real quick I want to go over. If you could please put your phone on mute when you're not speaking. If you're listening to the audio directly from your computer instead of calling in, be sure to mute your computer's microphone. It helps to minimize the background noise for our participants. If you don't know how to access your computer's microphone options, you can go to Control Panel, Sound, and then Recording tab. Please be sure to mute your microphones when you're not speaking. That would be really great. We appreciate it. Also, if you could wait to audibly ask questions until designated times. Amy will ask at different points if there are questions. And then just be sure to keep questions on topic and minimal. But feel free to submit questions at any time using the chat feature. And if you'd like to, you can go ahead and test out the chat feature now. If you can hear me and you can see the presentation, please type the following information: your vendor name, your location, and then have you ever visited a factory? So for example, ABC Products, Antioch, Illinois, and then yes. So go ahead and try out the chat feature and see if you can get that going. We'll come back to that in just a minute. Also, if we're not able to answer your question, please feel free to email vendoruniversity@searshc.com. I'll be sure to forward that on to the Global Compliance team so that we can get an answer to your question. So it doesn't look like anyone's responded using the chat. That's okay. Feel free to use it at any time during the presentation. We will be monitoring that. And for now, I'm going to go ahead and pass this on to Amy.
Hi, this is Amy from Global Compliance, and I'm a senior analyst here in the Global Compliance team. I've been doing this for about 2 years here at Sears, and I will be actually taking my first trip to China in March. So I'm excited about that. I have 4 kids, a dog, a cat, a gecko, a fish, and some firsts from this year for me were I got to go to Yellowstone Park this year, and it was absolutely amazing. And also got to take a trapeze lesson actually last week, and that was definitely a first, so that was kind of fun. So that's just a little bit about me. So what we're going to cover today is kind of an overview of what Global Compliance does, the issues that we're facing with factories, how we work together, how you and I can work together, and how to contact us. So on a large scale, what we do is we conduct routine audits in high-risk factories, and we're really looking at these kind of 4 major categories: human rights, labor laws, factory security, and the environment. And it kind of breaks down into these 13 categories. So, you know, with health and safety, we're looking at things like, are the workers wearing gloves? Are there chemicals being handled properly? You know, fire safety risks. Are there fire extinguishers? Are they accessible? Are, you know, exit ways clear so that, you know, employees can exit properly if they need to? And then we really kind of dive into some of the categories more on the right when looking at records and things like that. And this is really kind of the why we do what we do. First and foremost, our goal really is to protect the rights of the factory workers. We recognize that some of the factories really do rely on companies like Sears to protect their rights, and are aware that, you know, they can reach out to us if they need to, if, you know, they are having concerns in their factories. We also want to decrease the environmental impact, so we want to make sure that factories aren't dumping any waste into rivers or burning garbage or doing anything, you know, that would negatively affect their environments they're in. And the Additionally, we want to mitigate U.S. security threats, so we want to make sure that factories are paying attention to who has access to the cargo bay. We want to reduce any possibility of terrorist activity. And then last but not least, we want to reduce reputational risk, for Sears and for the vendors as well. We want to hopefully prevent some issues from happening. We recognize that there will be issues, and we just want to make sure that when there is, that we know exactly what was going on, that we were aware of it hopefully, and taking steps to improve it. So we want to be able to show that we're working with the factories to get these issues improved upon, and just kind of know, we need to be able to know who is producing where so that we're not caught off guard should a situation arise. So this is kind of the structure of our team here. You can see a large portion of our team is located internationally. We rely on them heavily, to correspond and to kind of be on the ground in some places. Primarily, domestic vendors work with us here, but you can, just as frequently hear from our overseas team with requests as well. So as many of you know, this has really kind of been an evolution of an industry, that began when, for example, here in '96, we show that a cost of Kathy Lee pants, it was 31 cents to produce in Honduras, and at that time it was $7.76 to produce here in the U.S. So clearly it made sense for vendors to start seeking production elsewhere, who wouldn't want that extra profit. Unfortunately, there were some concerns, some issues that weren't really realized or taken into account when those decisions were made, that resulted in some headlines that were definitely not favorable to the companies producing, some things that any of us would not want our names associated with, and this really was a result of not anticipating some of the challenges that we were going to face when looking at overseas production. There's definitely been some progress made. We show statistically that things have been improving. We do show that workers are being treated better, and that there is statistically less child labor going on in the factories. So, change like this obviously is incremental, but we have seen improvements. However, there is definitely still work to be done. This is a picture from an actual audit that took place. So obviously, there's still issues such as child labor. Bribery, unfortunately, is such an ingrained part of some cultures that, we do still see cases of bribery coming through. We do ask all of the auditors to document that. We recognize that the factories are, concerned for their business, and sometimes, they take that to the extreme. Unfortunately, we have a strict policy on that, so we need to continue to push back and let them know that that's not acceptable. Fire safety, as you can see here, you definitely would not want to be trying to get out of an emergency situation in a factory that has this much merchandise on the floor. It would be near impossible. Even if, I'm not sure if there is a fire extinguisher back there by that triangle. It doesn't look like there is, but even if there was, you wouldn't be able to get to it. I certainly wouldn't want to be caught in this factory. Again, here, just congested aisles continue to be an issue that we need factories looking out for. We need to make sure that in any kind of a situation that the workers would be able to get out first and foremost. Inconsistent records. So this is really kind of the meat and potatoes of our program. We really try to differentiate ourselves from some other retailers by really stressing the need to have the true and correct records from the factory. You can see here on the left, here is a record that a factory had given, management had given to us as their official record, but when compared with the workers' notebook that they often keep so that they can ensure that they are being paid fairly, that it showed that the factory worker was actually working on the days that the factory had said they were off. So, if we can't really establish when the factory workers are working, what they're getting paid, whether or not they're getting days off, then we can't really evaluate, clearly whether or not the factory is following the laws. So it's really, first and foremost, we have to know what's really going on before we can even work with the factories to making steps towards improving things. So we will definitely try our best to encourage the factory to show us true records, even if that's not their initial response to the audit. We will, assure them that if they show us true records, that we will work with them, and understand that probably not everything is 100%, but that we can make improvements if we know what's actually going on and help them with that. So we do have a policies, procedure, and guidebook. The policies and procedures is mostly kind of geared towards the vendors, the guidebook for the factories. These resources are available online and by contacting us. And this really has everything you could ever want to know about the program you can find in the guidebook. Okay, so are there any questions up until now? All right, I'm going to continue on. So who needs to register with Global Compliance? Basically everybody. We need registration of all vendors and factories with very few exceptions. So whether you're producing for Sears, Kmart, Land's End, even though Land's End is a separate company now, we are still running their program, so their registrations do go through us as well. And whether it's, goods are being purchased at a store or through a catalog or online, again, all of that needs to be registered. And regardless, the one exclusion to that would be if it's direct to store or direct to customer. So if it's not going through our warehouse or through our store, then that would be the one exception. But everything else needs to be registered. Whether, the vendors, whether you guys, think it's not going to be audited or it is, it still needs to come through us first to make that determination. And that's regardless of whether it's, whoever is the importer of record, whether it's coming in direct or indirect or domestic, it all needs to be registered as well. And that includes all brands too. So whether it's our brand, your brand, whether it doesn't even have an identifiable brand on it, even if it's a national brand that you think is not going to need to be audited, we just ask that you register it all. Because again, like we said, if there were to be an issue in a factory, we would want to know that the goods were there. Even if it was something that was a national brand, we would want to know that there was goods there that were coming to us so that we could respond accordingly. So we recently reviewed our subcontracting policy, and we no longer are allowing subcontracting of core processes such as cutting, sewing, assembling, pressing, packaging. However, we are allowing outsourcing of some secondary process. So if it's storage, embroidery, screening, stamping, dyeing, washing, tufting, binding, etc., we will allow the outsourcing of those. There are product category exemptions. So we recognize that some of these are monitored by the FDA. Some of them are just things that we don't need to audit factories for. There's not actually a factory for. So these, as a category itself, are considered exempt. So if any of you are producing in just these categories, then none of this applies to you, unfortunately. Okay, and we don't audit all factories. So although, like I said, everything needs to be registered, that doesn't mean that we're going to audit every single factory. About half of the factories that are registered actually get audited. And there are things that we take into consideration. I mean, if you're producing in a factory in Georgia, we're not going to go in and audit it. If you're doing a test order, very small, a national brand, something with a program that we've accepted, such as Disney, those are the most common reasons that we would exempt a factory from audit. And that would have to be like if they're only producing Disney. If they're producing something else there, then they may still need to be audited. So vendors are responsible for audit payment, and that payment is generally split between all active in-scope vendors in a factory at any given time. And audit frequency is determined by the rating that the factory received on their last audit. More details about that are in the guidebook. And the audits are then completed within 45 to 60 days of receiving payment from the vendor. And then the vendor and the factory will get the audit results and a request for the cap. So if there's multiple vendors there, then one vendor will be responsible for getting the cap submitted on behalf of the factory, but everybody will receive the audit results. And even if you are producing there and you're considered exempt from that audit, you will still get notification that the audit is going to take place. So just kind of pay attention as to whether or not you're financially responsible for the audit. And then we will always continue to work with the vendor and the factory to improve compliance in the factory before the next audit. And that's what we hope for from you as well, is that you know, whether it's going to be 6 months or 12 months, that you guys would work with the factory to make sure that those improvements are being made and the things on the cap are being followed through on. Okay, so unfortunately the reality is there are factory terminations. However, these generally don't occur until the factory has received 3 needs improvement ratings consecutively and is not really committed to, you know, correcting the violation. So it's really when we feel like a factory has no intention of making the corrections that are needed in order to make the improvements that have to happen in order for these factories to be, you know, safe and appropriate for the workers to work in. And at that point we feel like we've done everything we can to try to get them to show true records and to correct the violations. It's really, a lot of times it's inconsistent records is the biggest reason for terminating factories, because again, we've gone in there several times, they've met with our staff, we've said, you know, we just need to see the true records, and again, it just repeatedly doesn't happen, and that's when you'll see a termination result. Additionally, there are egregious reasons for termination. The reasons listed here, you will generally see them terminated immediately because these are things that just we feel can't be tolerated. So if one of your factories are terminated, what we ask is that all goods all must be shipped within 90 days. No new production is allowed for 12 months. After 12 months, we will consider the factory for production as long as they have met with the regional manager to discuss expectations, they're clear on what it is that needs to change in order for production to be allowed, and then a pre-approval audit will take place. This is all prior to production, that make sure that everything is okay before we allow production back in that factory. So you guys would reach out to us, let us know you want the factory to be reconsidered. At that point, they would be scheduled for a meeting with the manager, and then the pre-approval audit would take place. If that is passed, then that's when the production would be allowed back in the factory. A few country-specific things. We have begun allowing production in Myanmar. The difference is that all factories will be subject to initial audit. So there's going to be no exemptions granted. So regardless of, you know, what brand, how much, any of that, because we have not audited any of these factories, we need to get a baseline in these factories. And if you are interested in producing there, you would register them through the normal procedures. So Bangladesh, a little bit different than the rest. It's very important that all factories are approved by the Alliance prior to production beginning. So if the factory is already approved by the Alliance, it'll generally take 24 to 48 hours to get that factory registered so that you can begin production. If it is not already approved by the Alliance, but it is approved by the Accord, it is a shorter time frame in the sense that it would just take up to 4 weeks. But if none of the inspections have been done at all, then it can take up to 8 weeks. So it's really important that you contact us well in advance of production for Bangladesh factories to find out whether or not they're in the Alliance or Accord and to get that process started. And then just keep in mind that the costs associated with that are the vendor's responsibility, including its expansions. So many of you probably already know you can manage all of this information at shcfactorycompliance.com. And what you can do there is register factories, inactivate factories that you're not currently using. You can update the factory volume, and you can update contacts. If you do change a primary contact, just please be sure to email laborc@searshc.com, and that's just so that we can update the login information. But we definitely want you guys to be proactive and to be keeping things up to date. It is your guys' responsibility to kind of keep your factories active or inactive, and just keep in mind that if you do inactivate a factory, it is going to be 6 months before you can use that factory again. And if you have any questions about any of this, this is all of our contact information here on the U.S. team, and we'd be happy to assist you with anything, specific questions you have or further information you need, or if you're not familiar with how to do something on the website, just please reach out to us. So does anybody have any questions?
Okay, well, we'll stay on the line for just a few more minutes in case someone does have any questions they'd like to ask after people start signing off. So we'll be on for just a few more minutes if you do have any questions. Otherwise, have a great day.